Today we're stepping into the shadow corners of the Vatican, people, with the film Conclave. Yeah, I know the film came out last year, but I kind of want to talk about it because it's still an interesting topic. I don't think topic about church, theology, religion, faith, it ever gets old, but this is a good film. And now that the dust has settled and not a lot of hype behind it, we can now talk about this movie a little bit more. And that's what I want to cover on this podcast today, is revisiting this film on Conclave that came out last year. The film is directed by Edward Berger and the screenplay is by Peter Strong, based on the novel of the same name by Robert Harris. The film stars Ralph Fiennes. Ralph Fiennes. Sorry about that if I mispronounce his name. And as Cardinal Lawrence, Stanley Tucci as Cardinal Bellini, and Isabella Rossellini as Sister Agnes. The film has features a great ensemble of characters, and I really did enjoy at least the acting in this film a lot. Conclave was released, like I said, last year in October 2024 in the U.S. It was critically acclaimed. It won a lot of awards, including Best Adapted Screenplay at the Academy, and I think that's a good win for them, considering that this type of film where you want to be strongest as is in the screenplay. So that was great that it won for its adapted screenplay. The film got tons of nominations, as I mentioned earlier. It was a budget of 20 million. In today's world, a $20 million film is unheard of. But this film was only made for $20 million, and it made 127 million worldwide, which is, I think, made its money back to an extent. It is a small film, which attracted predominantly an older audience. No surprise there, as I am definitely the target audience. I am I am older than 35, so I guess it's fitting. But also, like I said, I like the subject matter and the themes in this film. My guest today, the great Alvaro Franco, an NYC-based filmmaker, friend, uh, honest person, great co-host to have on this podcast, and he's joining me to talk about Conclave. Together, we're going to talk about how Conclave makes its character feel both real and maybe predictable, the religious themes, and whether this movie changed how we think about church and its leaders, or just theology in general. So yeah, let's get started. First, talking about this film as a vessel of mystery. Is this a good film? Did you like the film, Alvaro?
Well, first off, thanks for having me back. Second of all, you're only as old as you feel. So I'm an advocate for saying 35 is the new 25. Did I like it? Always an important question. I liked it. Yeah, I liked it. It's one of those movies that I would recommend that I have no problem recommending to anyone, even if they didn't grow up Catholic. And I think even people who are not in tune with film craft can appreciate the things that it does artistically, especially the sound design, because it's not a film that has a lot of music in the traditional sense, but it has a lot of quiet moments, especially when the main character, Cardinal Lawrence, is making important discoveries.
At that meeting, the Holy Father dismissed him. What? He sacked him.
And then that quiet sound design is occasionally punctured by like loud bursts of music, so the effect is very intellectual, emotional, and also intellectual in the way that it calls attention to itself. But it makes you feel like you're very much a part of that sequestered setting. So I liked it overall.
I'm glad
Did
that you
you?
brought up those quiet moments. I did. I did enjoy it. It's one of those films that it's fair for, after the movie came out, people were saying that it definitely attracted a much older audience. I can see that because it's definitely a film that's very heavy on dialogue. Is also a mystery where is a he say she said, and you know what I mean. Everybody's trying to figure out what this person is up to. A little bit of cat and mouse situation as well with Tremblay. It's very that. So there were I like the quiet moments. I like when you mentioned that, because that's actually something that I noted down here, was like this movie definitely has these quiet moments and tense political moves, like very tense scenes that kind of feel almost like, is somebody gonna get thrown off a balcony?
Wait! No! You wanted the truth! I told you the truth!
Like, are we gonna find a pope hanging, that hanged himself because somebody discovered something about, like, what are we gonna find a nun dead or something? Or are we gonna get a scene? Sorry, I didn't mean to say the word, but you know what I mean? Like, there were moments that felt that way because the
It happens.
corridors. And yeah, like there was these moments where we were looking straight into like that door of the Pope that passed away, that it was like sealed with all these things, and it's just like this crimson door. And it was like this moment where you're just looking at that like hallway scene, almost like in The Shining. And I'm just like, what's gonna happen? We're gonna see a ghost. Like there were moments because it's it's intense, and I think that same year, or maybe the year before, I think maybe 2021 or something, the movie The Nun came out, which is a horror film in and of itself.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So there is like this element this very thrilling. So there is there's thrills in this film, and there were moments of very tense political, like what's gonna happen. We don't really know, and I found the film to be paced really well. I was in the conversations the entire time, and I think it has something to do with like the acting in the film. What did you think about um some of the characters that were in this film?
Um, I thought they were all realistic, and they weren't made to be stereotypes. Um,
Hmm.
there was there was one character that reminded the friend that I was watching it with of Italian or like Eurocentric attitudes about the church. Like only those from, I don't know if you remember, but I think it was Cardinal Tedesco, I think was his name.
Tedesco, yeah.
He had like a traditional, antiquated interpretation of the election process, or just Catholic, dogma in general, that said everyone outside of Rome is not enlightened, and we are the ones who. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact dialogue, but everyone outside of Rome, basically, like doesn't. He was implying that they don't deserve to have a say in the final process, and it's really those within Rome that know best and should be trusted, and therefore that's why his candidacy was really the only one that deserved
Yeah,
to be the next
Tedesco
pope.
was a heavy traditionalist. He was definitely representing the right. If we were to look at this as just general politics,
Mhm.
he definitely was the right. And I liked actually the characters as well too. I like Rafe Rafe Fiennes. Oh my God, why am I getting his name wrong?
I'm going to
I
send this to
like
him afterwards. And just
I like Rafe Fiennes' portrayal of Cardinal Lawrence. I felt his dilemma in a lot of ways. I like also the character of Stanley Tucci, Cardinal Bellini. I felt like he was also he was supposed to represent an American cardinal, like representing America, because as you saw there were different countries being represented there. So it was very international, very worldwide. And all the cardinals come together from different countries. So Stanley Tucci, I believe, was representing the American side. And it was interesting because I don't know. I felt like, and we're going to talk about this more because I want to talk about moral arguments in a little bit. But that is definitely something I want to touch on because I felt like the moral dialogues in this film were more or less a hit and miss in certain moments. And I think it's worth exploring that. But overall, I also felt like the characters were, for the most part, really well written for the situation they were in because they were confined into this space. And again, those moments of tense, of like he said, she said, and even Isabella's character, Sister Agnes, she even mentioned in her when she had her moment in the film to kind of speak, and she had her monologue. She mentioned like we nuns were giving, and I'm paraphrasing here, but we nuns were given the opportunity by God, by the grace of God, to not to not just have mouth but also eyes and ears.
Although we sisters are supposed to be invisible, God has nevertheless given us eyes and ears.
So she's basically saying, we may be here serving you as like because again there was there was some undertones there of like sassiness with her with that monologues, but she's basically saying like we may be serving you here, but we see and hear things just as much. And she feels like, at least that's how I interpret it, she felt like her opinion also matters. And I really did enjoy that part of the film as well. Her monologue was very well delivered. She just looked so realistic. She looked like someone who's like really into the faith but also very strict, and also really is seeing and hearing the problems and the challenges that the church is facing. and most likely believes there needs to be some change because she, as a woman, feels like, hey, we might need to have this conversation at some point. So I really do appreciate her. I also like Benitez's character too. I felt like they gave him enough to make him mysterious for that twist at the end.
A cardinal in Afghanistan? It's absurd. How many Catholics are there in Afghanistan?
He was head of the Catholic mission there until his elevation.
Which, by the way, if you're listening, there are going to be spoilers. So
Oh, are there?
there are going to be spoilers. In this, of course, we're gonna break down the film as much as we can. Obviously, this film didn't come out last year, so we're not gonna spend too much time on it. But I think it's worth talking about because it is a film that we just don't get films like this all the time. With how the direction Hollywood is going with, member berries or nostalgia. So it's really nice to see a film like this. So it's worth talking about. It's worth continuing to recommend. But yeah, let's put a pin on characters because I do want to talk about the moral dialogue. I think that's a great way to kind of talk about how these characters were fleshed out. But I do want to continue talking about like the film cinematically. How did the way that the director Edward Berger is his name, how did you feel the film of the Vatican, the filming of the Vatican, make you feel about the conclave process? Did you feel like he captured those moments really well? Did you feel like it makes sense? Or did anything stand out in some of the shots or some of the scenes?
I think the setting made the most impact on me thematically more than cinematically, only because I felt a greater urgency to see that film for purposes of research for my own project than because I was instantly attracted by the subject matter. Therefore, when I watched it, I was really paying attention to how much of a glimpse into the behind the scenes of that process and the College of Cardinals organizing itself was portrayed, rather than emphasizing that a little bit more than, or paying attention a little less to the plot devices and the 3-act structure, if there is. I think in this case it was more like it felt like a 6-act structure or 5-act structure. But no, cinematically it was great. I don't try to discern what was shot on digital versus what was shot on film. I know a lot of purists like to do that. Like to analyze how much grain appears in the print that they're watching, or they'll only insist on watching something projected on film. But it seemed like the cinematography was very realistic in how minimalist it was, and what was like getting away with lighting less versus lighting more, and what would a place that doesn't allow for a lot of sunlight to come in look like realistically, and how much can you see in the shadows, and how to dramatically light scenes without using a lot of obvious light sources, so practicals, that sort of thing. I thought that was a very well done, realistically lit, practically lit film. And I think I have, especially when digital cinematography gives you a lot more latitude, I always leave the theater impressed with how much they're able to achieve with low lighting situations.
Yes, I want to talk about that a little bit too, because the lighting was really good in this film. I also felt like the film was very stylistic in some shots as well. Like, remember that scene where they all had their umbrellas and they were kind of like moving? Well, that scene...
I wish I did. You've seen it more recently than I have, but I'll take your word for it. It probably was visually striking.
It was very, very striking, very stylistic. They all had like the same umbrella, and they all were like walking in unison and like going inside. That was very stylistic shot. There was another stylistic shot when they were like inside. They were all like dressed in red, and it's like this like moment of pace. That was like looked really gothic but really cool. I really enjoyed this film in terms of its lighting. You also mentioned like you find like the lighting is very interesting in the way that they shoot these moments of like dimness and like dark corners and stuff like that, where they get they create really like this very mysterious atmosphere, almost like what's over there, who's over here. That reminds me of Caravaggio. I remember in film school, and obviously we're going to mention film school because me and Alvaro went to the same school. But yeah, I remember in film school we were having a class. I can't remember where the class was, and I'm sorry, and I can't remember who the teacher was. But we were talking about Caravaggio, the famous painter from the Renaissance era, who, if you look at his paintings, he does these shadows and he create almost like the scenes that today inspire a lot of filmmakers, like the director Robert Eggers, who did Nosferatu, got also influenced by Caravaggio's painting in terms of creating these type of like very atmospheric, very like intimate with like shadows, and like one dim spotlight. Um, Also, The Godfather, Francis Ford Coppola was also very influenced by Caravaggio's paintings and wanted his films to look like that. He wanted to achieve that. And I remember watching The Offer. I don't know how true to the real story is, but apparently the the lighting crew was very upset that he wanted his films to look this dark, and he was like, "No, I know what I'm going for. You got to make this darker. I don't want too much light." And there was like this back and forth, like, "That's not how you light a scene. You need more light. You need this." We're talking here the '70s, so there's definitely that was, we were going in for a more realistic approach to filmmaking. So I'm pretty sure behind the scenes there were a lot of challenges of people that didn't want to go that progressive and didn't want to be that stylistic. So it's nice to still see those influences today, because I feel like there is a lot of influence that we can get, not just from watching other films, but also from art itself. So I really enjoyed this film, in terms of its cinematography and also a lot of their shots. I think that they were very beautiful. Even the ones that feel more stylistic were very beautiful too.
Well, you have to give a lot of credit to Gordon Willis for the photography style that he developed for the Godfather films. I don't know. I didn't see The Offer, but I'm hoping that the filmmakers dedicated at least some time to showing how he They call his nickname was the Prince of Darkness. Yeah, because he whenever he or prints were made of the negative that he shot on set, unfiltered, untouched. He always wanted to make sure that the blacks were black without being crushed, and the lighting wasn't overly flashy and instead naturalistic and very reflective of the interior or the exterior that was in focus at the moment. But yeah, I mean, it's good. Like, going back to your point, it's good to see in the 21st century that these kinds of this minimalist approach is an echo of what they did in the '70s.
Yep, I love that. I love that too. I'm loving Robert Eggers. I know that this is not a film by Robert Eggers, but I just want to like shout him out real quick. I've really been loving him. I've only watched really just two of his films, and I haven't been disappointed. I want to see The Witch, and I do want to see The Lighthouse. So those are the two that are in my bucket list right now to watch. But yeah, oh my God, like I feel like he's like the new this 21st century, um, millennial generation of Tim Burton. I don't know
Mm.
why he gives me Tim Burton's vibes in a lot of his film. Like, he has a very specific style and it's very dark and it's very gothic. But I love him. I love what he's doing, and I hope he continues to make great films, because we need more people like him. He's definitely a student of the craft, and you can see that when he is talking about his films, which is how I learned that he was also influenced by Caravaggio. And I was like, oh my God, Caravaggio is one of my favorite painters for that same reason. Because when I discovered him in school, I learned about Caravaggio, and when I went down that rabbit hole, quote unquote rabbit hole, because I only did but so much. I really just loved it. I loved it, and I could see why filmmakers loved it too. And glad, like you said, glad to see that it's still something that is referenced in the 21st century, considering so much that's going on.
Well, you've seen two of his. I've only seen The Lighthouse, but I also want to watch
You
The
only
Witch.
see The Lighthouse? Yeah, you should watch Northman. I like The Northman. A lot of people were saying like, "Oh, this is such a bros film," or like, "This film celebrates violence and glamorizes it," or whatever. And I'm like,
It's
we're
about
talking.
Vikings
Is
and Norse mythology. Why are you deluding yourself?
exactly, that was exactly my point. I'm like, this is a movie about Vikings, literally about Vikings, to the T. It's about their Norse mythology. It's about their lore. It's so much about literally the Viking history. And I feel like he did a great job.
Mm.
I love Alexander Skarsgård. I think he's great. That family is just great. We talked about him in the last podcast about nepotism, but I feel like it's an exception with those brothers. I think they're great. But yeah, in general, I love, going back to Conclave. I really did enjoy this film in terms of its cinematography and its shots. So glad to know we're on the same page about that. So as I mentioned earlier, we were like talking about characters and how, whether they were realistic or predictable, you felt like they were realistic. I felt like they were realistic as well too. There were moments where I felt like they were a bit predictable, like, okay, this is, obviously, there's a cardinal, he's gonna say those things, but or he's gonna act that way. Especially with Tedesco's character, I felt like, oh my god, he is so like
Well,
stereotypical
but
Italian cardinal.
when what my friend said was that he reflects what a lot of Italians in real life
Yeah,
from that part of the world think of
yeah,
the religion. So she was
yeah.
like,
No,
"That's very accurate." Like his character is like sounds just like one of the Romans,
yeah,
the what do you call it? The elitist Romans nowadays
yeah.
behave like.
I guess that's good with characters, right? You don't want to be too predictable, but you want to at least stay true to the sentiment of that type of character from that part of the world. And so I felt like it probably worked here. I really did enjoy the characters, but one of the things that I want to dive into this character analysis, whatever, I want to talk about the moral argument. So the reason why I want to talk about the moral argument is because in school I bought a book. I bought a book. Like I went on like a book spree when I was in college. I read a lot, even books that weren't assigned. I really read a lot. And one of the books that I bought when I was in film school was called The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. And it's a great book that talks about not just story in film, but also story in books. He referenced Homer. He referenced um, the Iliad. He referenced a lot of different types of books, Shakespeare, but he also referenced storytelling in film, and he uses a lot of examples. One of the chapters was talking about the moral argument. Right. There's this chapter that shares his view on the importance of like a good moral dialogue for creating scenes that feel engaging and realistic. So back to what we were talking about, like these characters, they felt realistic. Um, the scenes were engaging. Um, and according to Truby in this book, The Anatomy of Story, um, he mentions that the key to good moral dialogue from the opponent's side is not to make your opponent a straw man, but to make him formidable by presenting a compelling argument from the opponent. So my question is, now that we're unpacking this film, do you feel like the conservatives or the traditionalists, not so much the conservatives, but the traditionalists in this film had a good argument, or any of the morally ambiguous characters here in this film? Did you feel like Tedesco, for example, and Tremblay? Um, did you feel like they had a good, compelling argument to counter what Lawrence and Bellini, the more progressive one, as well as Benitez character? Did you feel like those two had a good argument for as the opponents in order to nail the moral dialogue?
It's an interesting question. Um, I think I think it's a little difficult to answer if the film itself doesn't have a particular point of view about which argument is right versus which one is wrong, and instead it's the characters who are more passionate about presenting those views. Because you have to remember the first, like roughly the first half of that film is really like a mystery about it's treated like a mystery um, in terms of why like what was the reason for this medical procedure or some type of procedure authorized by the late pope.
Colonel Benitez, his health problems. He was issued a round-trip ticket to Geneva paid for by the Pope's own account. I checked his visa application. The purpose of travel was given as medical.
Who was behind it? What was the reason? And why did no one else prior to his death anticipate the arrival of Cardinal Benitez? Right. I think there's a technical term. It's like I mean, I could quickly cheat right now in Wikipedia, but it's like a Latin term about uh, why a candidate is allowed to appear at the last minute to this conclave. Impectore. There we go. Yeah, naming a cardinal impectore.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first half of the film, I would say, is more concerned with the mystery aspect of the plot, and it does a clever way instead of like dumping all this exposition, even to those who may already be familiar with the process. It lets the characters introduce themselves by engaging in these ideological or theological discussions about what they believe is right for the church or for the future of the church.
If you want to canvass on my behalf, then make sure that my message is clear. I stand for everything that Tedesco does not.
And that way we learn about them at the same time as they are making the point for why they should be elected as as the new pope following the conclave. So I think that was a clever, and it's probably also the same in the novel that the film is based on. That was probably like a clever narrative device to deliver information without stopping everything, just so a character can explain the plot. For someone who has the film playing in the background while they're cooking or running errands. So I didn't really pay attention to the moral arguments that way, but I did think that, me personally, I'm an agnostic and I don't really follow the doctrines of the Catholic upbringing that I had, or that my parents and my dad's side of the family, tends to believe in and tries to fulfill. But I do logically think it makes the most sense to support the argument that Cardinal Benitez and Bellini make towards the end of the film, in terms of allowing women potentially to enter the priesthood, and how Cardinal Benitez's experiences, wartime experiences, make him the ideal candidate to deal with the changing political climate in the outside world.
With respect, what do you know about war? I carried out my ministry in the Congo, in Baghdad and Kabul. I've seen the lines of the dead and wounded, Christian and Muslim. When you say we have to fight, what is it you think we're fighting?
It was a logical conclusion for who wins out at the end of the film, and it's also a logical conclusion for how those affairs should be conducted in real life. It's like the most humane and the most empathetic candidates for that position of power tend to come from those who have served the most impoverished, the most besieged communities in other countries, in less developed countries. So I think that was the moral argument that won out, and instead of the traditionalists who wanted, have a very antiquated and gatekeeping way of ensuring the role of the church in turbulent times.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point in terms of like the film doesn't really give much of a moral argument between Tedesco, Tremblay, or even Adeyemi.
The African
I think
Pope,
Cardinal,
or the
from
candidate,
Nigeria,
sorry. The Cardinal,
the Cardinal from Nigeria. I feel like he was also a traditionalist.
I'd say he was the most
So let's not-
conservative. Out of all the
he was also a traditional, along with Tedesco and most likely Tremblay as well. And we'll talk about his moral dilemma in a minute, or even if he had one, because the guy was pretty corrupt. He did two things that weren't really nice in that film, which makes him like the real quote unquote bad guy. But they didn't really give him much of an argument, right? He was just flat out wrong. I think the argument is more between the viewer and what they're seeing. So, are you the opposing side to this argument, or are you the hero of this argument? And it's kind of left up to interpretation in that kind of way, where there really isn't a clear moral dialogue between two people. Like, according to John Truby, or how I understood what the moral dialogue should be in a scene or in a film, there wasn't really much of an argument from these men, from Tedesco. There really wasn't much of an argument from Tremblay, because they were very clear that they didn't want a progressive church. They like you said, they wanted things to be very antiquated. And they believed in the old ways, especially Tedesco believed that it should be in Italian, as a pope. Like, for him, it was racial, led. He was very much a traditionalist, from head to toe.
Avremmo parlato tutti latino, tutti. Ma dove i tuoi amici liberali hanno deciso di cancellare? The dead language. Senza Roma, senza la tradizione di Roma. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold.
And Adeyemi believed, like, hey, it's time for an African to be a pope. And he was also very traditional, which is why at the beginning of the film, as we were seeing the votes coming in, or at least in the second half of the film, when we were seeing the votes coming in, he was almost in the lead. He was almost going to win.
I risultati del terzo scrutinio sono i seguenti. Cardinale Adeyemi, 52 voti. Cardinale Tedesco, 30 voti. Cardinale Tremblay, 10 voti.
Like, he was going to be that person to win. And then the scandal came around.
And then he slipped up.
Yeah, he slipped up. And we found out that it was because Tremblay asked to bring that nun so that, the rumors and the scandal could start spreading. That, by the way, what we're talking about is the scene in the cafeteria where Cardinal Adeyemi bumps into a nun. And that nun happens to be a woman who he had an affair with and a child that they ended up putting in adoption. And him seeing her there was a sign, because he wasn't expecting to see her there, was a sign of a sabotage or some sort of trying to ruin his image. And when Cardinal Lawrence went into to figure out what's going on, what was that fiasco, because she ended up dropping a plate and then running and crying. And he ended up walking away. So it was very abrupt.
Let me see that.
What happened?
When the scene happened, you don't know what's going on until you start going on this quest with Cardinal Lawrence to find out what it is. And you find out that it was an affair that Cardinal Adeyemi had with this woman and with this nun. And it was very interesting to see that then being revealed that it was Tremblay that did it. So he was always kind of like this, always portrayed as like this bad guy the entire time.
My brothers, it's true. But the Holy Father asked me to. I had no knowledge who this woman was. I swear to you.
Giuda, traditore.
There really wasn't much of an argument from his stand. He didn't have much of an argument himself. He was very corrupt, because not only did he do that to ruin one of his competitors' image, him knowing the truth, but also he was buying votes.
Yeah.
So he was rigging the election, which, surprise, surprise, corruption in an election. Who would have thought? Yeah. So he also doing that, and they found this out. And we realized that that's what, the dead pope, the pope that died, was trying to get him to step down. But he died before anything significant could happen, so the guy stayed around. And when Lawrence was confronting him, he was very, he was extremely narcissistic. Like, he was pretending that he didn't do anything wrong. He was gaslighting Cardinal Lawrence the entire time.
The Holy Father demanded your resignation.
What? That's absurd. I don't know. Who told you that?
So you have this character that was just very clearly wrong, and you really can't root for him. There's no wiggle room to root for him. You really don't have much to argue back. He's not formidable because he clearly isn't someone who is doing anything worth us thinking through. Like, maybe he has a point. Kind of like Thanos.
The way they tried to build him up is, if you remember, I think there's an argument scene between Bellini and Lawrence where they talk about war.
That's where we see it. Yes.
That's really like the only, I could say, moral conflict within the second half of the film. It's not so much about liberal versus, or progressive versus traditionalist viewpoint. It's more like, yeah, this guy sucks, but if you make everyone aware of this scandal or this corruption, you're going to destroy whatever liberal or moderate coalition exists.
If we liberals are not united, Tedesco will become Pope. You have no idea how bad it became, Thomas. The way he and his circle attacked the Holy Father towards the end. The smears, the leaks to the press, it was savage. He fought him every single day of his pontificate. And now that he's dead, he wants to destroy his life's work. If Tedesco becomes Pope, he will undo 60 years of progress.
You talk as if you're the only alternative, but Adeyemi has the wind behind him.
Adeyemi? Mm-hmm. Adeyemi, the man who believes that homosexuals should be sent to prison in this world and hell in the next. Adeyemi's not the answer to anything, and you know it. If you want to defeat Tedesco...
No, this is a conclave, Aldo. It's not a war.
It is a war, and you have to commit to a side.
So it's like, do you do the right thing, or like, are you going to sabotage this and then put someone worse that we don't want in the lead for Peps?
Like Tedesco, because they noticed that Tedesco is worse. That's how they were painting it. They were painting like, I know Tremblay is bad. It's unfortunate what happened to Adeyemi. It would have been really great to see him win. But Tedesco, they were making it seem like Tedesco was the worst. And I think the worst thing about Tedesco was that he was a traditionalist. So for me, I really didn't see, they didn't give him much of like a scandal, besides the fact that the guy is just, in our terms, a bigot. You know, I don't know if they have a term for that in the church, but that's basically what he is a bigot. You know what I mean? There were some racist undertones with him as well when he was referring to Adeyemi. So he was definitely a bigot. So he was like the Trump uh, of the election here, of the papacy. And so here we have this guy that everyone is saying is the worst. So we have to look at the lesser of two evils, and Tremblay was the lesser of that two evil. I don't know how I felt about that argument, because if you were to ask me, what do I think about the lesser of two evil argument, I don't like it. I don't think it's real. But when you're looking at the perspective of like a moral argument, there is an argument sometimes to be made when you're looking at the lesser of two evils, right? There's sometimes a good argument. That's what, to your point, what Bellini was trying to do. He was trying to make a compelling argument that, listen, not a great guy, we get it, but he's on the lead, and if we jump him now, that we don't have Adeyemi and we don't have anyone else, Tedesco is going to win.
Well, I think that's one of the scenes that they used that they used in the trailer too, right? It's like, this is a war, you know, like, why are you acting like this is a war? This is a war, and then.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it was intense. And you felt that tense because, again, it's the same feeling you get when we were in election year in 2024, where all of us were like, if Trump wins, it's over. You know what I mean? But you weren't really pushing anyone worth voting for. We didn't give people that moral argument. So, you know what I mean? You didn't give people something to think about. And I feel like in this film, they were trying to do that with Cardinal Lawrence and even Cardinal Bellini. Like, Cardinal Bellini was like, I can't, I don't have that many votes, but you can. Lawrence was like, no, I'm not going to run. That's not my thing.
And he still kept getting, and the thing I keep remembering, he kept by Benitez.
Yeah.
They even had that confrontation scene. It was just like, I don't want your vote. Exactly. And Benitez's reply was brilliant. It was just like, nevertheless, you have it.
I don't want your vote.
Nevertheless, you have it.
Yeah. It was almost like he was like the reluctant hero, like that hero journey story. If you know anything about like the hero journey, is like a how do you call it? It's like a framework for how to create a hero that is compelling, that goes through this journey, and it has to learn to become and to accept that he's the chosen one, type of thing. And I felt like Lawrence was going through that a little bit. If you were to really take a look, take a step back and kind of look at his arc, he was kind of going through that. He was like this reluctant hero who did not want to become a pope and didn't want no one to vote for him. And Benitez ended up winning.
Spoilers
ahead. Benitez ended up winning, but he was the one who ended up getting most of the votes. And we know how that happened. There was also another moral argument happening regarding terrorism, because there were moments of terror happening throughout the conclave. There were moments where nearby cities were getting bombed, and so that was affecting the buildings that they were in. And there was the scene where, an explosion from a car or something like that was parked nearby, kind of shattered the glasses, and they were like in their rooms where they were voting, and they had to kind of like get everybody out of there. And then, no one died, but there was like a huge moment because everything kind of like fell apart. There were like glasses and things thrown on the floor. So there was definitely damage done to the building, but no one got hurt in the film. And there was this another moral argument about terrorism between Benitez and Tedesco. And they were talking about like, Benitez made the argument that, what do you know about war?
Right.
We sit here, we judge, but we don't know what it's like. We don't know what it's like to be Muslim and to have to deal with that, had to live in a war zone, had to get your home bombed. So he was making the argument like, listen, who are we to judge? We don't know what it's like to be in the position. And our job is to, be neutral and to try to uphold the peace, both sides. Well, Tedesco was like, no, we're the leaders and we need to put these Muslims in their place or whatever the case may be. I'm paraphrasing, but basically the guy just did not like Muslims, clearly.
Sì, una guerra di religione. Noi abbiamo bisogno di un capo. Che ponga fine alla deriva che dura incessantemente da 50 anni. Quanto tempo dovremo stare ancora in questa debolezza? Quanto? Noi abbiamo bisogno di un capo. Who fights these animals?
Like he was just like anti-Islamic. He just felt like they were all terrorists. Yeah, I think he called them animals at some point. Maybe I'm maybe I'm kind of like making it up here, but he basically was just like very anti-Muslim, very anti-Islamic. So he was all for like the next pope to be very involved and to kind of set the standards or whatever that is. And that's when Benitez kind of like stood up and spoke and gave his monologue. I didn't think his monologue was really that strong. I felt like what he was saying was true, and I really liked his message, obviously, for obvious reasons. But I don't think it was enough for me to feel like, oh, this guy needs to win.
I think maybe that was the effect of the film, maybe. It's like at the end of the day...
And at the time, by the way, real quick, we didn't know he was intersex.
Other big plot twist.
Another big plot twist. So we'll get to the ending, but basically, at this point, he's still seen as a man.
Well, yeah, that's the key to the mystery in a way. Like that was the reason that was the medical procedure at the beginning that the previous pope had authorized or had personally arranged somehow. It was for his surgery, which he denied because I think, to paraphrase, like it was the body that God had given him. So why change it?
Why change it, right?
Yeah, that was a powerful.
It's a message that came out of left field, to be honest with you, because I wasn't expecting that. I was actually talking to my partner about this, my fiance, and I was actually telling him, like, if you were going to lead to that ending, at least make Benitez a bit more mysterious. Because right now you're making him seem like this voice of reason, this like awesome, like this guy cannot do anything wrong, and this perfect figure that came out of nowhere. You know what I mean? And he probably is a very good guy. He's definitely probably one of the purest ones there, but the purest one hiding a secret. Is it okay to lie? Is it okay to deceit? Is it deceit? Is it lying? Does it matter? And that's the question that it leaves you with, which is why I say there really wasn't much of a moral argument between characters, except for these moments that we're talking about, that were very small and short-lived in the film. But there was more between the audience and the film. And I felt, depending on what side you are, or whether you're neutral or, to your point, agnostic or atheist, you know what I mean? You will have a different moral argument. And I felt like Lawrence was out here just uncovering one scandal after another, figuring out, finding things that were hidden about Tremblay and his illegal dealings. Like Lawrence was just Sherlock Holmes the entire time in this film. The guy was just like investigating everybody.
I'm not a witch finder.
This one thing came about, and all of a sudden he's like, you know what? I'm gonna keep this one to myself. Or at least that's how the film kind of, illustrated it. Like, you know what? Because this is different, because this is progressive, because he might actually, or this person, because now we have to call him a person. We don't know exactly how the Pope Benitez was identifying. I'm not sure if he.
No, I think they left it deliberately vague, and it was just a biological male with female organs.
Exactly, a biological male with female organs. And so at this point right now, Cardinal Benitez, has this secret. Are we supposed to keep secrets? Isn't that the whole point of what we were trying to avoid with a lot of these cardinals doing things behind closed doors? And now we have this person, and it makes me wonder, like, is there a moral dilemma here? Or because it's Benitez's situation, there is no moral dilemma? Because at the end of the day, what really matters is who the person is. And I think that is technically a pretty decent message if you really unpack it and think about it. It's like, at the end of the day, Benitez was a good man. Benitez had a good argument about how we need to handle, or he didn't make much of an argument, but at least you can see he's on the right side of these wars. He doesn't want them for either side. He doesn't feel like neither side deserves it. We need to end this. We need to end this corruption. So he's probably someone who the Pope that passed away felt like, you know what? You're a good person. Why should I judge you based on your gender identity? Why should that matter? And I think that's what Lawrence had to sit with, because after uncovering so many things, he has to ask himself, okay, this is one thing that I don't think really matters, because what matters is we put the right person in the seat. And that's what we wanted. So I think that there is something there for the viewer to have as a moral argument, more so than the film itself. At least that's how I see it, because they were very clear wrong and rights. And like, John Truby said in his book, you got to give your opponent a good argument. And I don't feel like a lot of them did have a good argument, except for Bellini, who kind of wanted to go the lesser of two evils route, because he didn't feel no one else was going to get another vote. And then we found out Benitez was, after that speech, kind of, skyrocketed into stardom, into populism. He became like the populist after Tremblay was the populist, or Tedesco was the populist, or whatever. He became kind of like the populist for the papacy, and he ended up winning. But I felt like that ending was pretty. It definitely left you with a lot of like, was this necessary? But then again, yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, I think you hit upon the I don't want to say issue, but maybe dilemma. There has to be some more sophisticated word to describe it, but let's say dilemma, like the dilemma of basing a story with characters that are supposed to be morally pure, not sinful, and dedicating their lives to something holy and bigger than themselves. And I think that's the primary challenge when making a film about a religious or an organized religion, and even more so when it's confined to one location. That could have easily just been a play, but for this in this instance, it's a film set in one location, where the characters intentionally and that's something I didn't know, that during a conclave, like any connection to the outside world or any influence from the outside world has to be kept at bay, because they're isolating themselves.
Yeah.
And
there were a lot of criticism about this film in general. A lot of people were saying there wasn't enough prayer, which is unrealistic of a conclave, which I agree. I think there should have been at least some scenes where we see a lot of prayer. We saw some prayers, like when Benitez showed up, he asked to pray.
Eminence, please would you bless our meal?
Of course.
Bless us, O Lord, and this your gift, which we are about to receive from your bounty. Bendice también a todos aquellos que no pueden compartir esta comida con nosotros. Y mientras comemos y bebemos, ayúdanos a recordar a los que tienen hambre, a los que tienen sed, a los que están enfermos y a los que se encuentran solos, y a las hermanas que han preparado esta comida para nosotros. Por Cristo nuestro Señor. Amén.
Amen. Please come.
Well, he does do a homily.
Yeah.
They do. Lawrence does do a homily where he asks the College of Cardinals to lean into uncertainty, if that makes sense.
The uncertainty monologue. Sorry, I felt like that was really good. I really did enjoy that as well. I think that when we talk about, for example, when we talk about doubt and we talk about uncertainty, that's a huge thing in religion. I'm a religious person myself, just straight off the gate. I'm a very religious person myself. I'm more spiritual than I am like institutionalized religion. But I do believe what he said was part of the reason why I have such a strong faith, is because I don't think it's real. And I also think it's real. I have these two I doubt the existence, but at the same time, I want to believe. So I have these doubts, but I also have these beliefs. But it's in my belief that I feel the most satisfied and the most fulfilled. And so I do think that there is something to that. We can't always be certain that we're going to do the right thing. We can't always be certain that our, this age of tribalism that we have, the left, the right, the up and down, you know what I mean? The black or white, it's all very tribal. And a lot of the times, because of that devoteness to that tribe or to that ideal or to that group, and sometimes blind us of what exactly is that we're trying to achieve here. What is our purpose? And no one asks questions. No one becomes skeptical. Like, is this the right thing to do? Should we really be doing this? And I think in religion, where people always feel like they have to be right about something because the Bible says so, this, that, you don't truly know how God feels. If he's real, you really don't know how he truly feels. What you know is that there's the scriptures. They give us words, we interpret them, we try to follow them, And a lot of the times they contradict, especially how it's being interpreted. They contradict what we believe is compassion, what we believe is doing the right thing, what we believe is good. And that's where you need to start asking questions and you need to start having doubts. But not, I don't believe doubts on the spirituality aspect of it, but doubts on the institution.
Certainty is the great enemy of unity. Certainty is the deadly enemy of tolerance.
So I feel like in those scenes, in that scene when he gave this powerful speech about certainty, is that it is an enemy. Like you can't be 100% on something. You got to have room for some skepticism. Even today in the world of technology, where everybody's obsessed with science and rationality and reasoning and logic, and everybody wants to be technical now and scientific. Even in that, you need to have a sense of skepticism and ask questions and wonder whether something is this good for humanity. But I wanted to ask you, did the movie help with anything that you're trying to do right now? Any work that you're working on? Wink, wink. Like, how has it inspired you, or maybe
Am I
not
studying to be a
inspired you?
priest? Is that what you're asking?
Let's talk about, you told me about a script that you're writing. And you mentioned how you were trying to include some, trying to include some plot regarding Catholic or the church or religion. How is that going? And after watching this film, is there anything from this film that you feel could definitely inspire what you're trying to do?
For sure. From the outset, I was more interested in the film and watching it for research purposes, even though I am a fan of the actors, and the plot did seem interesting. But I was in the middle of it came out when I was in the middle of the writing period for that script, and I was kind of hitting a brick wall in terms of how the procedures of the inner workings of religious institution can be made to seem dramatic or exciting without being too technical. And it's probably that script is probably the hardest thing that I've had to write, because not all of that is made publicly available. And I think that the main advantage that Robert Harris, the author of the book who also co-wrote the script for Conclave, had is his journalistic background, which enables him to have access that Joe, somebody like me, wouldn't normally take advantage of, because we don't have access to those circles.
And just to mention real quick, Robert Harris actually spoke to some cardinals, some priests, and he asked them question about Conclave. So he definitely had some connections, or at least some, people that were able to give him some idea what is in there. But he didn't know everything because he couldn't. It's very a secrecy event. Is very, you can get in trouble for saying what happens inside there. So it's not like he had a lot of information, but to your point, he definitely had priests and people that he can talk to and kind of sit down with and talk about like the process a little bit.
And he's a former journalist. And I think when you come from that profession, you already have a Rolodex of people that you can, just a Rolodex of contacts that will make your work automatically seem more authentic, because you know how to report and to create a narrative that hooks people. In my case, the script that I'm working on, and it's still in early development, is more local, and it concerns the passing of the Archbishop of New York State. So it's not as ambitious or as international as trying to decide who the next pope is going to be. But I do feel that the existence of Conclave gives the project legitimacy, and to your point about the box office receipts, it proves that there is a market for something that's seemingly unique, or that only a certain audience would be interested in, actually is more expansive and has a chance for success, given all of the attention and the box office success that Conclave had. So it proves that there is a market for that kind of story.
Absolutely. Is there any of the themes that are in this film that you feel attached to, that you feel like, hey, this is something I might want to tackle on my end with this project I'm working on?
Well, from memory, not really. admittedly, it's been a while since I've seen the film, as you could tell, unfortunately.
Okay.
But it's really more about the setting for me, and how like men of principle deal with a scandal that could potentially damage the very infrastructure of the institution that they've devoted their whole lives to serving. I think that's probably the main takeaway that I could apply to this project. Otherwise, like, any other similarities are just on the surface and not really that profound. My project has to do more about what does and it does have a connection to the LGBTQ community for now, in this draft, but it's more, my project is more about how do different interpretations of the same faith reconcile if there's romantic love thrown into the mix, but then also what how does a potential how can Catholicism potentially evolve to deal with a government or a leadership that's hell-bent on persecuting and targeting immigrants that ironically can be some of the most devout, but are now the most vulnerable because of something as flimsy and non-religious as their citizenship status.
Yes, yes. Faith is a funny thing because despite the good things that happen in my life, or despite the bad things that happen in my life, I still find myself very much asking God for help, or asking God for, or whoever is listening, asking God for help, for, strength and for resilience. And I feel like to some degree there is some divine, intervention that sometimes I feel does take place in my life. There are moments that I can't really explain. But for the person on the outside can maybe look at it, like coincidence, or like, oh, that's just coincidence, or that happened because of this. But I don't like to look at it, everything that happened in my life, like that, because there are certain things that I feel like even science can't explain. And I wanted to kind of ask you that as like the last question to kind of wrap up this amazing conversation, which, by the way, always love talking to you. So please come back as many times as you want, because, this is always a lot of fun. But I want to ask you about your faith. Now that we have spoken about the film, we've broken down these characters, we talked about the moral arguments, your interpretations of certain moments of the film. But what did you feel has changed, or maybe not changed, about your views on religion? And let people know whether you believe in God or not. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't offend me. So I'm really curious as to what you think.
Well, what I was saying was I'm currently an agnostic just based on the events that have happened in my life. I may not be a devout follower, but as a student of life, I'm always curious to hear about other people's upbringings, other faiths. I actively, in my personal time, want to meet and learn more from secular Muslims as well as devout Muslims, for example, and not only not demonize them, but show what a global melting pot this world, this universe really is, and how we all benefit from that. And yeah, that's been, I think, my approach to storytelling and to filmmaking eventually, because I do want to make a couple of films, not just this one, but a couple of films based around that theme of religion. And in fact, one I already wrote one draft of a magical realist script that's about a whole different religion, but it's one that is based around the Dominican, let's say, a particular denomination of Christianity that was born out of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So it's very specific to that subculture. And then on the other hand, there is a great Latin American novel that imagines Jesus Christ coming back. I don't know if it's the second coming technically, but the story of Christ as told from one of his disciples in the 20th century after Jesus is born in Mexico City instead of thousands of years ago in Palestine. So I'd love to do a few projects based around that theme. And just to wrap that up, I don't think that you need to be a devout Christian or someone who is a religious traditionalist to make compelling films about faith. Because I think
No, absolutely not.
in
It's
in
an
America,
interesting conversation to ask yourself, even as you're writing, because you can put a lot of yourself into it without it feeling very almost like you're creating a film about Christians for Christians. You know
well,
what I
that's what
mean?
I
It
was
does
alluding
feel,
to. I think it's a
yeah,
uniquely American thing where
yeah,
there's like a Christian film industry, and that's one thing that I always try in my pitch deck or when I'm doing my elevator pitch to people. It's like, no, this isn't. We're not trying to, join the Kirk Cameron channels of production, for example, or Kevin Sorbo, for that matter. It's like, no, this is a story about faith, but told from a humanist perspective. It just happens to be about faith, and it's not meant to cater to that crowd exclusively.
I love any themes regarding like theology or regarding spirits or the spiritual or heaven and hell. That's why I like Constantine. First of all, the comic books are really interesting, but also the movie with Keanu Reeves I really did enjoy. It wasn't perfect, but I enjoyed it because I like those themes. I don't know, I don't care if they're campy or not or if they make sense or anything like that, but I really do enjoy those type of things. And this is coming from a person who's religious who should be looking at those things as like, no, that's like
Well,
that's the devil.
one Italian filmmaker that I'm trying to get more into is maybe you know him from Carlson's class or any of the classes you took at City College, is Pier Paolo Pasolini, who was a self-proclaimed Marxist, but a lot of people generally feel that his film about the life of Christ, which he made, which was titled the Gospel According to Saint Matthew, as like the best depiction of that part of the Bible. And he was an atheist, but the film was so compelling.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Passion of the Christ is another one, that was not necessarily written by, anyone that really wanted to tell. I mean, how many stories about, Jesus getting crucified? The one with Willem Dafoe was another one that came out a while ago. I forgot who was the director in that one, but
how are you going to do My Man Scorsese like that?
Oh, there you go. Martin Scorsese. Thank you. I always forget he's the director in that film. I was just about to look it up, but thank you. Yes.
It's a very atypical Scorsese movie.
Because it's not a typical Scorsese film. Like Ugo. Isn't Ugo a Scorsese film too? Yeah, not your typical Scorsese film. So you sometimes forget that he's the one that writes it, that directed it. But yeah, like, you don't have to be, like, to your point, a devout. Like, he probably does have some religion. He is Italian, so there's probably some Catholic upbringing with him as well. You know what I mean? So he has that experience. But I think that for me, I see religion as a guide for virtue, not for perfection, but for virtue, to try to be a little bit virtuous one day at a time. I don't see it because I don't fear men. I have more of a fear of the unknown than I do of men. Men can't be trusted. I really don't think, you should be going to the church because you like the priest. You shouldn't be going to the church because you think the people there are cool. At least that's how I see it. There is something there to get from religion. There is something there to learn from it. And some people might read it and it'd be like, oh my God, this sounds like a lot of the philosophy that I have read. Here's an example, and I'll do this real quick because I know we got to wrap up, but I'm going to try to nail this. But here's an example. When we talk about religion, specifically when we talk about doubt and uncertainty, right, in the film Conclave, there is this moments where I felt the film was trying to say, it doesn't matter what the religion is. There's bad people everywhere. It doesn't matter if the person is a, devoted Christian. There's bad people everywhere. People are going to make mistakes. And that's why we need skepticism. That's why we need doubt. And that's why we need all these kind of things. But I feel like there is also philosophy that sometimes mirrors those conversations just a little bit. For example, Nietzsche, who I'm starting to resurface back into my life again because I've read about Nietzsche in college and completely forgot about the dude. And then, as of recently, I've been going back to trying to read academic papers, trying to watch videos, trying to learn more about him. Eventually, I'll buy the book Don't come at me, philosopher majors. But actually, I'm gonna buy the book and read them. But for now, I'm doing kind of more of like diving into getting back into this guy. 'Cause I'm not a philosophy major. I wouldn't know how to even go about understanding or interpreting his work. But based on what I do understand about Nietzsche and what he believes is that will to power, the Uberxmen, or I probably butcher that German word, but
The
the
Ubermensch?
Overmen. Yeah, thank you. Or the Overman or the Superman. His philosophy is very based on his time, a time where the Industrial Revolution was happening, the Renaissance. You were logic, reason, rationality was starting to kick in, and religion no longer held that influence that it once had. So he felt like people were asking now more questions, and they weren't really getting answers, and they feel like there was an emptiness, and there needs to be substitute with something else. And so that's where his philosophy comes in, is to how to find purpose in a world where you're left with more questions than answers. And why is that resemblance of some of the things I have read in the Bible? Is because even in the Bible itself, it says not to trust men. Even the Bible itself says not to trust yourself.
Somebody said you should send that to Ted Cruz.
You should. This is why it's so dangerous when priests and men get so certain about what's going to happen to you if you don't do certain things. It's so dangerous to spirituality, because in the Bible itself, there are moments where it says that. Now, my apologies if I cannot point you to where exactly in that Bible it is, but I'm pretty sure if you look it up, you'll find it. I'm not,
a bibliophile.
Exactly, in that kind of way. Exactly. I have my faith in my own way, and I do it in my own way. I haven't read the Bible since I was very young, so I wouldn't.
Such a heretic.
I wouldn't tell you, but it may be something that I should go back to, just to find these moments and make these connections. But there is moments in the Bible where they do say that. Now, the only thing you really should be trusting is in your faith. And if you interpret that into philosophy, it's basically the same thing Nietzsche is trying to say, just in a different word. It's basically the same thing the Stoics are trying to say, just in a different word. And in a different way. The thing is that religion is a very powerful, influential force, and it's very respected. It's the longest living book in the world. So there is this like respect and this fear of it that a lot of people have, and therefore that's why it's very difficult to criticize. But I also feel like the criticism can sometimes be a little bit unnecessary or done in very tasteless ways. But there are moments where I'm left with like, hey, I go to church on Sundays and I would listen to the pastor talk, and I go to this very progressive church. It's a very progressive church. And one of the things that I've noticed when he's preaching is like a lot of things he says sounds like things I read in philosophy books, or at least things I read in philosophy academic papers. And I'm just like, how is nobody making the I was just looking around. I'm like, that sounded like, you know what I mean? That sounded like this philosopher. That sounded like this type of philosophy. And so I started to realize it's not really the people that matters in your faith, is you, the person, in your own perspective, what you feel you got from it, that's leading you to virtue, is leading you to do the wrong thing. And again, that's up for interpretation. And like Nietzsche said, there's really no objective truth. It's always depending on the person.
Well, there is that running joke about Nietzsche saying God is dead.
And then that's where his philosophy grew from. Yep. He noticed like, damn, people no longer no longer fear God in the way that they should. Religion no longer answers the questions no longer has the answers to questions that people are now having regarding, new technology and the existence of a different world, or, new developments and new things. And now everybody's questioning, is there really a God to fear? And if not, then how am I supposed to find purpose? And that's really where a lot of my interpretation, obviously, loosely, I'm not a philosopher, so anybody that wants to chime in, please go ahead in the comment section. But honestly, it's just one of those things. It's how I'm seeing things. Obviously, I have more that I want to dive into and more that I want to explore and research. But so far, that's the connection I'm kind of making. So that's really how I felt Conclave was also trying to go for, is that let's write a film about the Vatican, but let's also leave it up for interpretation at the end of what you think should have been the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, religion is different for everyone. Like my boyfriend is a religious person too, but he's way different of a religion person than I am. Way different. Like I got baptized and everything. You know what I mean? Like a full-blown Christian. But even though I, don't practice it in the way that I used to, because I no longer go to that church where I got baptized. I go now to this church, which is more progressive. It's called Harvest Fields. It's in the Bronx. But now that I'm listening to that to going to that church and listening to those sermons, it's a different experience for me. So again, even in that alone is different for every person, for every person in every different stage of their life. Religion is just going to be different for them in different stages of their life. Maybe when you were younger, it was a bit more serious, but now that you're older, it's a bit more philosophical than anything else. And that's where I am right now. I see religion, I see spirituality as a philosophy, and not so much as something to point fingers to or attack someone with. Anywho, we're at time. Alvaro, thank you so much for just being here with me on this podcast, for talking to me about Conclave. I had such an amazing time. What Conclave does so well is remind us that even in the most sacred space, people are still people, wrestling with ambition, doubt, identity, and the weight of tradition. My thanks to Alvaro Franco for joining me in this conversation and for sharing insights both as a filmmaker and as someone exploring these themes in their own work to some extent. He already explained. If you found this conversation thought-provoking, stick around for future episodes. We'll keep exploring films and stories that blur the lines between faith and fiction and showing us that the real intrigue isn't just behind closed doors, but inside the human heart. Until next time, thank you. Make sure you subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.